And welcome back. We are going to start applying all the different techniques that we've talked about up to this point in order to create our images much more rich and dynamic. Now here we have a reference image of a rainbow gem. So we have talked about reference images before, and we're going to go ahead and attempt to create our own. Now, of course, in here we have a bunch of different colors. Now, one of the best things that we learned is how to use things like the eyedropper tool here to quickly grab a color from this different image range. So if I use the eyedropper tool, I can click on a color in order to change to one of those different color zones really easily. Of course, if I want to do my own, I also have color palettes here that I can pick from, easily choosing a color in order to add to my own selection. And it makes our image ultimately very nice and easy to work with. Now, we also, of course, talked about things like the brush and pencil tool. But for now, let's of course use the pencil tool, because if you notice, we have some nice hard edges here in our image. So let's go ahead and now take a lot of those techniques that we talked about, such as straight lines and stuff like that, in order to make this rainbow gem of our own. So let's go ahead and go to File, New, and we're going to today choose 64 by 64. Since our reference image is also using a transparent background, we're going to choose a transparent background again. Click Create, and Control 0 to zoom. And of course, now we have a 64 by 64 image. You can see that this is quite large in comparison to what we're working with. Now, if we look at this image, you can see these lines are pretty thick here in comparison to my single pixel line, which means that I can probably actually increase my brush size. I'm going to take that up to size 2 here. And now let's go ahead and get ready to draw our rainbow gem. But before I do that, because this rainbow gem is kind of symmetrical, I'm going to go ahead and do one thing to make my life a little bit easier for this drawing. And that's why I'm going to come here to View. I'm going down to Show. And I'm going to turn on the grid. And what that will do is allow me to see a little bit more. Now, you can't necessarily see it here because the grid's not really configured, but there's some faint lines running through here. If I were to fill this with a solid color, you might see them a little bit more. I can also, of course, show things like rulers, which of course can give me extra dimensions here to kind of look to see where different things are running. But I don't need the ruler right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and shut that off. Now, if I were to go back here to the original reference image and also add on to that grid here, you can see a little bit more clearly here how the grid will appear against my reference image. And you can see very faintly the lines here. So let's go ahead and try to use, you can see that right now I have a faint line here. You may not be able to see it as well on yours. You might have to adjust your settings. And if you can't see them, that's okay. We're simply just using these grid lines to kind of act as a guide for us. So if you don't see them, that's okay right now. Now we will later come on and show you how to make grid lines, for example, more visible or make them easier to find, but I'm just turning them on right now so I have a faint reference. So pixel size 2, hold down that shift key. Let's go ahead and make ourselves the top of our rainbow gem. And there is the top right here. And if you look at our rainbow gem, it is coming down an angle. So I probably should have backed this up a little bit, but that's okay. We have our eraser tool that we can use in order to back this up. Now, of course, it is right now smaller than my brush size, so I can increase that. And I can back this up a little bit. And of course, I can see right here, I have my first grid line here. And if you look, I have about 1, 2, 3 approximately widths of eraser here. So I have about 1, 2, 3 approximately here. So it should be pretty close in size between these two. Going back to my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and choose, maybe I want to take this all the way down here to the edge. So I'm going to start here as a reference. Again, holding down that shift key to make this nice and solid. And now that looks like that's not quite even. I can just Control Z to do that, undo that really easily. There, that looks a lot better. And now let's say we want to bring this right down in the center. So we can see a grid line right here. But I'm going to come underneath that because I want this gem to be nice and large. And I'm adding this section right here because, again, if you look at our reference image, you can see the bottom does not come to a point, but rather is actually flat. And now that I have the gem started, I can go ahead and click to make my straight line. And there's my rainbow gem. So we have the basic structure started. But if we look, we also, of course, have some structure that runs across here. So this is just a straight line moving across, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now we have these nice grid lines here to kind of help act as guides. Because one thing is we could, of course, divide this up evenly, but let's say our rainbow gem is turning. We could, of course, use that to act as guides to show the rainbow gem turning. Now, because this is not the outside border, I'm actually going to decrease my pixel size back down to 1. And I'm going to go ahead and use this guide as kind of my first color section. Now, if I do this straight down, you can see that we do not have straight down here. We have these kind of angles going. So I'm actually going to undo that a little bit. And I'm going to do my rainbow gem just a little differently than my rainbow image that I have for reference here. Because remember, this is a reference image here. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. So I'm going to go to where my guideline is here. And I'm actually going to kind of go down a little bit. And I'm going to go back. Do the same thing here. Down a little bit. And go back. And if it's not perfect, it's okay. So I kind of have a couple colors in here that I could potentially do. Let's cut these sections a little bit more in half. That one looks like it could be improved a little bit though. And then it looks like we might have one that we could squeeze kind of in here, because it looks like it's just a little bit too large. So we're just going to go ahead and do this. If you have difficulty, you can always just come in and manually brush stroke this as well, which is what I'm going to do here. All right, and now we have the top of a rainbow gem. So now I'm going to switch back to do the bottom here. And for this one, I want to maybe have these come down to this point here. So I'm just going to kind of branch off from wherever they left off. All right, and that's all simply using straight lines. Now we, of course, can use our reference image here to kind of tell us, oh, we're going red, orange, yellow, etc. So we, of course, can choose to use our color palettes. For example, I could choose to use like this pure color palette here, or maybe I want to use more like one of the pastel colors, or maybe I want to use the original reference image. All right, but the eyedropper tool can make that really quick and easy for us to be able to come in, pick a color, and go ahead and fill this gem in. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the pure color palette, and I'm going to first start with the red. Now, because the red is first, I'm going to go ahead and pick that, which I've done. And for right now, let's see, if we use the fill bucket tool, and I go ahead and click in that area, you can see we do get some bleed over here that does happen. All right, which is something that can happen. Now, if we use things like our brush tool that we have used in the past, if we switch back to brush for a second, and I were to come in and paint that area, you can see that we end up with this fading effect, and that's not what we want right now. So for right now, we're actually going to stick with our pencil tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that up a size, and I'm actually going to go ahead and paint that in as best as I can. Now, if I want to get more precise without worrying about overlaying these images, I can actually create a layer here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this layer as red. I'm going to put that underneath the gem, click back on red here, and now I'm going to paint this red without worrying about necessarily ruining the original gem image. So here's our layering coming into play to kind of help us make a nice image here. And you can see it's kind of restraining inside those lines because I created a red layer. We're going to use that same technique now, of course, to fill in the rest. Now I do have these two small lines here right here, so let me just go ahead and grab those real quick. And let's see that again now with orange, just real quick. It's kind of a dark orange really, but we're going to just stick to orange. So here's my orange for the color palette, so I'm going to grab that. And again, using my brush tool, I'm making sure orange is underneath the gem, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint that in there. And you can see it doesn't really, it can bleed over here to the red, so you still have to be careful, but it is a lot easier to do this when it's in its own layer, because now I don't have to worry necessarily as much about ruining the gem layers, because notice the gem will not get painted over. I might go outside those lines a little bit, but it's still a lot easier to have some margin of error here and then adjust my tool accordingly. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and when we come back, we'll have this gem fully painted. Alright, and we're back. Now you can see, of course, I filled this gem in here. Now I could, of course, come in here and add some. For example, you can see we have these white areas in here and some slight colorations. And that's all something that we can do. But for now, this is a good spot right here to stop. I might, of course, like I said, just go ahead and add some white in here just to maybe show some sparkle or some color variation. But of course, that's better achieved by using our color palette here. For example, to add, maybe I want to use this light orange or this dark orange, or maybe some of these other greens in here to kind of show some variation in the color tones. That's all things I can do. But for now, this looks pretty good. I think this is going to look great, just to kind of showcase off our abilities of the different things that we have learned and how quick and easy it is to use color selection to make the shape. All right, and that's going to wrap it up for now, and we'll see you next time.